Thank you so much, Paul, and thanks for the invite to be here today to discuss this work with you all. This work is a culmination of about 3 years of analysis between a large group of folks coming from the Rubisco project, part of the Department of Energy portfolio. And my name is Elias Massoud, currently at Oak Ridge, and there's a ton of folks who contributed to this work, both nationally and internationally. So I'd like to thank everyone who also contributed here. So today we're going to discuss diagnosing soil moisture in CMIP-6 models. Okay, so why is soil moisture important? Before we look into the results, it's good to understand why this is something we want to look at. So soil moisture plays a central role in the Earth system by regulating the storage and flow of water and carbon and energy between the land and the atmosphere. And so accurately getting this correct in models is very important for getting predictions of the whole Earth system correct. And tracking how models represent soil moisture is tricky because it's vertical in the soil layer, there's representation across depths. So it's not that straightforward in just simulating it. And we see that the simulations often struggle to capture deeper processes like root zone dynamics or groundwater interactions. Also, to evaluate the models, we need observations, and monitoring soil moisture globally is pretty difficult because high resolution in situ networks are pretty sparse, while satellite observations only measure skin depth moisture. So it's difficult to really understand dynamics of soil moisture, whether in models or observations. And so this work is intended to somewhat bridge that gap by diagnosing how we're doing so far as a community in global soil moisture representation. So what variables are available in, for example, CMIP models to look at soil moisture? The MRSOS, which is the surface soil moisture, is a variable that all models offer, and it's essentially the top 10 centimeter average soil moisture. And then there's a MRSOL variable. This is an alternative. It offers the layered soil moisture information. So you get a vertical structure in the profile, and models offer this variable as well. So you can choose MRSOS. This will give you one value. So in this figure here is a hypothetical model at a certain grid cell at a certain time step. And you see the MRSOS variable is this one value here in red up to the 10 centimeter mark, whereas the MRSOL is the blue. It's the vertical structure where you can integrate to whatever depth you're interested in. So if we want to get MRSOS from MRSOL, we can integrate to 10 centimeters, and that theoretically should give us the same value. So we diagnosed this in 9 CMIP6 models to see if this integration actually holds true. And those results are published in the paper listed below in Environmental Research Letters. And today I'm going to discuss some of those findings. Um, just a quick slide on the equation of how to integrate soil moisture. I won't go into the details too much, but it's important to know how do you even integrate the MRSOL value to get MRSOS. And one of the main ideas is the conversion of units to make sure we're getting everything in volumetric soil moisture so that when you're comparing different vertical layers, you're looking at the average soil moisture in that vertical depth, which allows us to compare between different data sets better. So in essence, this soil moisture integrated term should be equal to MRSOS when we do this integration. So we did this for the 9 models listed here. You see this, there's CMIP6 models with their resolutions, the land model that they use, and a couple information on depth bands and the soil profile itself. And we see that in some models, this integration is equal across the globe, and they're indicated here under equal all grids. So for example, the CAN ESM5 model has an equal integration. Yet we also see that some models have it equal in some grid cells, but not others. And then there's some models that have it not equal in any grid cell. This column here, the MRSOS depth band, this is if you extract the MRSOS variable from a CMIP model and you look at the metadata will show the depth bands for that variable, and it should be 0.1 meters in theory because it's 10 centimeters. But for example, the Access ESM15 model has an incorrect reporting, and this is a known issue. There's a CMIP errata for this, where the modeling center indicated, hey, we put the wrong value in this metadata. So if you're using MRSOS, just keep that in mind. So our analysis here is kind of in the same flavor where we're trying to see this integration and the representation of the metadata. How accurate is it all? So looking at the global maps, these are the models where we have no bias in this integration. So the CAN ESM models on the top, for example. The MRSOS map is on the left. This is the top 10 centimeter average soil moisture. And then the integrated MRSOL is in the middle. So when you subtract those two, if there's no bias globally, then this integration is the same. And you see that's the case for all of these models. However, here's the case where it's equaling some grid cells but not others. And you see this, for example, the NOR ESM2 model here on the bottom. You see there's this bias specifically in high latitudes or other areas as well. And for this MPI ESM1 model, we see there's some bias, particularly in cold, frozen regions. So, not sure how to explain this, but what we're seeing is that if you try to derive MRSOS from MRSOL, you can do so in some grid cells, but not in others. So, what's exactly going on there? And then the case where globally there's an error are here's some models that show this. The Access ESM15 model I mentioned earlier has that known errata, and you can see globally there's a very large mismatch, and we understand why this issue is here is because of that misrepresented metadata. Then some other models here, for example, the CESM2 model has this high estimation of MRSOS globally. So rather than just reporting this diagnosis, we wanted to also look under the hood and see, is there something we can do in the integration to maybe fix these issues? And so for the CESM2 model, we looked at the metadata and we looked at the depth bands, and we realized they're not the same depth bands that are reported in the documentation of the CLM5 model. So for some reason, when CESM2 simulated MRSOL, they reported the metadata and it was inconsistent with their documentation. So in our equation before where we showed that integration, if we actually just used the documentation depth bands, all of a sudden the bias between the two looks more like this on the bottom right, which is interesting. So we seem to fix the issue in some grid cells, but now in other grid cells, it has a bias, which coincidentally looks like the NOR ESM2 bias. And it's kind of not a coincidence because both these models use the CLM5 land models as their base land models. So it seems like once we fix the metadata issue for CESM2, now we're left with this residual bias that might be from the land model itself. So in summary for this study, we diagnosed whether integrating soil moisture gives us the right value for the variable they give us, which is MRSOS. And we see that there's some discrepancies in some models and in some grid cells. And these discrepancies can arise from various factors, such as metadata errors. And so the study really highlights this need for routine consistency checks, not just for soil moisture, but this could be the case for other variables, whether in the ocean domain or the atmosphere, where an integrated value or a derived value that's reported, we want to make sure there's consistency in what is being reported, especially in preparation for CMIP 7. So with this new gained knowledge, we performed a benchmarking analysis of CMIP 6 soil moisture and its ecohydrologic interactions. So to perform the benchmarking, we use the ILAM framework. It's the International Land Model Benchmarking Software. And for those who are not familiar with ILAM, what is it? It's a community coordination activity, which is intended to develop internationally accepted benchmarks, promote the use of those benchmarks, strengthen the linkages between observation and modeling communities, support the design and development of open source benchmarking, and really the whole land modeling community that I'm familiar with tends to look towards ILAM for performing benchmarking. So if you're not familiar with the tool, hopefully after this presentation, you'll be a little more familiar. So the results I'm going to show are from ILAM 2. but just for the record, ILAM3 is also in development currently, and for newer analyses, lots of the communities using ILAM3. The paper documenting all this is from the 2018 Nathan Collier's paper in James Journal, and it's based for ILAM2, but I think there's new documentation that's very helpful for ILAM3 as well. So if interested, here are some links that can help you get more acquainted. So to jump into the study itself, this was work published in GMD not too long ago, and essentially we just benchmarked soil moisture and its interactions with some ecohydrologic variables, such as gross primary productivity, leaf area index, and evapotranspiration. And this is looking at a suite of 16 CMIP6 models. And we looked at surface as well as root zone soil moisture using MRSOS and MRSOL, now that we know that there's some distinctions between them. So the table on the top here is showing those models with their resolution, the land models they use, and some information on the soil depths. And then below are the observations we bring in to perform this benchmarking. So for surface soil moisture, we obtain the ESA CCI soil moisture product, which is inherently the top 5 centimeters because it's a satellite remote sensing blend. But then for surface and root zone, the Wang 2021 blended product, it's a blend of land surface models, satellite data, and different products into one, and it offers layered soil moisture information. So we use that for surface and root zone. And then for GPP, we're using the WeCan product. LAI is the AVH15C1, and for ET, we're using the Gleam version 3.3A. Some of those results are shown here. This is for the global run. So in evaluating the models globally, you see orange is indicating the models that are doing relatively worse versus purple showing models doing relatively better for that specific variable across the globe. And we see that it's not necessary that if a model does one thing right, that it's doing all the variables right. There could be a mix and match in these results. But also, if you look at other regions, which we provide in this analysis, so for example, instead of looking at global, you can look at the tropics or maybe semi-arid regions. So those might produce different results. And then we have tailored diagrams, such as the ones below. The one on the left is showing MRSOL 10 centimeters versus the Wang 2021 product. And you see, for the most part, the CMIP6 models are doing a pretty good job. They have high correlation and high normalized standard deviation, which indicates the variability. However, for the root zone, we use the MRSOL to 100 centimeters, represents the root zone. And we see there's this overestimation of the variability. So in the models, the deeper soil profile has too much variability compared to what's seen in the observations. So as I mentioned, we could look at specific regions. Here's the tropical benchmarking, and different results pop out. So for example, the CLM5 based models we mentioned earlier, CESM2 and NORESM5, these seem to do really well across the board for soil moisture, for the relationships with ecohydrology. And this indicates that these CLM5 based models, they perform well in energy and water-rich environments. They might have this physical coupling between soils and plants that seems to perform well in the tropics. Whereas in contrast, these JS Bach-based models like MPI ESM1, they're showing a weaker performance for the tropics. So maybe this indicates the opposite of, what the CLM5 based models are doing for this region. And we mentioned these relationships. So you can look at GPP with soil moisture or LAI with soil moisture or ET. And this is for one model in specific, the Access ESM15 model compared to observations. And this is supposed to show us when you have higher soil moisture, what happens with GPP. Essentially, with higher soil moisture, you get higher plant productivity and plant dynamics. So we wanted to see if these relationships are captured in the models like they're shown in the observations. And we show the suite of results in our paper, so you could kind of flip through the different models and see which models are doing better for these relationships.
Elias, you've got 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. I think this should be my last slide. So yes, final thoughts. Basically, models capture surface soil moisture well, but it might have less skill in the root zone because the variability is overestimated. And realistic performance in a single variable doesn't mean that the model's capturing all true soil biogeophysics. By including the Köppen regions, we showed how model skill can vary based on the region. And performance strongly clusters by land surface framework. So we see that, for example, models that have the soil plant hydraulic coupling tend to do better. So maybe for CMIP 7 or for future developments, we should prioritize as a community rooting depth distributions and soil plant hydraulic couplings. Those are just a couple of findings we found in our results. Yeah, so thank you. I'm happy to take questions, and I listed the publications here for anyone who's interested.
Okay, thank you, Elias. We have got one question in the chat, so I'll just read that out. That's from Assis. He says, nice talk and results. SM is closely related to total parts per trillion. Did you also look at parts per trillion biases? Are they related? I think that's what he's referring to.
Okay, I'm trying to find the chat, see if I could read the question. Okay, here we go. So much is closely related to total PPTN. I'm not sure what PPTN is.
Oh, it might be precipitation biases. Yeah.
Precipitation.
I see. Okay. Okay. So we did not look at precipitation biases and how they relate with soil moisture. Our main focus for this work was intended to look at how eco-hydrological coupling is done in the model, so how soil moisture is interacting with vegetation. Precipitation definitely is a factor there. So that's a good point to take note of. Thank you.